All right, so we're going to analyze the poem Letter from Brooklyn from the 2023-2024 SHSAT DOE Student Handbook. I have links to it on my website for anybody who wants to obtain the handbook. This is from Form A. Okay. All right. So as usual, when we're covering a passage, I'm going to analyze it and then answer the questions afterwards. So as usual, I would suggest that you guys basically pause the video, try to read it on your own, try to understand it, and then see what I say as I'm ripping it apart. Okay? All right. So this is Letter from Brooklyn. We often want to use the title. The titles that they give are often not clickbait, so we can use them to our advantage when we can. Usually a title is not significantly helpful, but if it can be helpful, sometimes we can use it, okay? So we have to decide that after we read the passage, whether it makes sense or not. Now, before we jump into this, realize that the whole poem is one giant stanza. All right, so sometimes that makes it easier to understand a poem, and sometimes that makes it harder. And if you notice, there's an erraticness on the right-hand side. Our line numbers 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 is going to help us get a context, especially when we get into questions where, for instance, it might ask for like lines 5 through 6 of the poem down here, right? So that's something we need to figure out as well. All right, so hopefully it's not too complicated. It's a poem, so there's going to be literary devices, just like when there's non-poems. There's also going to be literary devices. So let's jump into this. I can already see how this will end. So I'm already asking myself what will end. Okay, how I would grow tired of the bridge's steep incline. So I'm left to be, which bridge are they talking about? So I'm hoping they can eventually answer that in the passage, but sometimes they don't answer all questions. So what I'm going to go with now, since it's Brooklyn, could this be the Brooklyn Bridge? The Manhattan Bridge is nearby. Could it be the Williamsburg Bridge? I'm not quite sure. All right. Could it be another bridge unrelated to Brooklyn at all? So we're not sure of the context, and we're not sure if it even matters whether the bridge is important. Because it could be the incline that's important. Okay, how will I grow tired of the bridge's steep incline? Why? Why would they grow tired? Okay, so these are the questions you're asking. You know, there's a lot of question marks here. The absent-minded tourist wandering into the bicycle path. So as we all know, there's a lot of bicycle paths in New York City, and if you're on a bridge, even the Brooklyn Bridge has a bicycle path. So often the bikes and even tourists end up in the wrong lane. So the person's pseudo complaining here, and they're growing tired of this kind of thing happening often. Is that significant? Let's kind of see. And that word wandering, I like the word wandering in the context of this passage as well. So what we're trying to look for is the literal things that the author says and the metaphorical ones as well, right? So the thing with poems is they favor and lean on figurativeness on the literary devices and the author's craft kind of things. So we also want to lean there because there's usually hidden meanings and so on. There's hidden meanings in non-poems as well, but it's very strong in poetry, which is what makes them hard. And a lot of people are like, I don't really want to do a poem. And it should be something you prep for. And by the way, that's why I'm doing this poetry series. So at the end of this, we're going to have about 10 poems that I'm ripping apart. And it should be a good assessment of what you should be looking for and how to analyze these and rip these apart. I'm not teaching these. I'm just doing them live. So there's a lot I'm leaving out here about what goes into poetry and stuff like that. I might eventually do a video on that by itself, as if you were a poet yourself, and also exactly what some of them are. I've mentioned them in some of the other parts of this series here, because I'm basically doing SHSAT and Hunter College High School poetry kind of in the same kind of series here. They're fairly close to each other. I don't want to compare them, but yeah, there we go. So we're looking for rhyming. We're looking for alliteration. We're looking for the onomatopoeia. We're looking for repetition. We're looking for similes and metaphors. We're looking for different ways that the author is using grammar, sometimes incorrectly using grammar on purpose, and just the way the author is forcing us by structure to look at it. And again, I pointed one thing about structure now. It's just one giant stanza. Okay, and the stanza is the equivalent of a non-poet paragraph, if you will. So we have this big blob that the author's throwing at us right now. All right, so so far what we have is the author seems to be anticipating something, because I can already see how it will end, and even predicting it. And also that they're getting weary of something, okay? And then the author flips into here, the weather will turn cold, but that all happens later. So I'm left with saying, what's that? Just like over here, I can already see how this will end. So the author's using pronouns. This and that are pronouns. You guys should know that, because that may come up in the revising editing A section and even the B section. For now, it is the early edge of fall. All right, so the author's using seasons here, it seems, as one technique. So we don't know yet if the author's meaning seasons literally or metaphorically. One of the things about poetry is the seasonal, cyclical occurrence of life and the journey through life and things like that. So I don't know if we don't know yet if that's why the author's dragging this into here, or the author literally is talking about the season that's occurring. So for now, it is the early edge of fall. Leaves green still while the air narrows. Is slightly crisp, almost grazing the hair of my arm like a passing stranger. All right, I'm going to kind of stop there, even though that's not the end of the sentence. And so it seems we're at late summer, early fall. And the author is kind of narrating what kind of happens. At that point, all the trees have grown and all the floral has kind of met it's kind of almost ended the thing, right? We have spring where everything buds and starts growing, and then over the summer, the greenery all comes in. So this seems to be what the author's talking about here. And we can tie that in here, these two, this little, if we call this A and this B, we can kind of relate them, because it's saying the weather will turn cold, but that happens later. And then the author's saying right now, it's kind of the beginning of fall, right? The early edge of fall. So they're talking about the seasons there, literally, I think. Leaves green still while the air narrows, is slightly crisp, almost grazing the hair of my arm like a passing stranger. So, as fall approaches, the air gets more brisk. It might get a little colder, a little windier. I don't think the author's going quite to there, but the author's coming right up to there, and almost grazing the hair of my arm like a passing stranger, as though the air has been forced by the brevity, and they're making that a footnote. You guys should know what that means, though. Briefness, shortness, the brevity of daylight. So why is daylight being brief at that point? As the so-called long days of summer end, we end up getting the short days of winter, if you will, right? So we're between the two seasons. Seems summer's just ended, fall is beginning, and eventually the day is going to shorten. So I think that's where the author's going here. And then they start a sentence with but. But when it starts darkening at 4, this closest I know will be a felt distance. So at this point, they are talking about winter. They're not saying they're out winter yet. It says when it finally gets cold, and the timeline is moved back. We move our clocks back, and just through the rotation of the Earth and all that, it starts getting dark at 4, right? In New York City, at least. So if we merge that all together, going all the way back to line number 6. But all that happens later. The weather will turn cold, but all that happens later. For now, it is early edge of fall. Leaves green, still while on the air and arrows, is slightly crisp, almost grazing the hair on my arm like a passing stranger, as though the air has been forced into intimacy with the brevity of daylight. Okay? But when it starts talking in 4, this closeness, I know, will be a felt distance. So a felt distance means it'll be a thing of the past. Okay? And if there's something relating to the tense here, if you will, past versus the future versus now. At least if nothing else, the author keeps dwelling in the now. All right, so that is something that's going on. It's going on subtly here, like someone drawing your attention to their lack of intimacy. So I think the author again is saying, when winter comes and we're not as active and things like that. All right, so versus during the summer, everybody wants to go out more. Even towards the edge of fall, it's still a nice time of year. Autumn, the leaves are changing, all these kind of things like that. But the author seems to be intent on sticking to the greenery, if you will, because the author is going to mention this later on as well. There's not much left of the poem, but that's where we need to go. So, and there's almost right here is a pseudo turning point, if you will. And it's almost like the author should put a new stanza right there, okay? Because the author's talking about just generalism in the season and what's going to happen and the now, and then the author gets specific. So there seems to be a slight movement here, not a turning point like there's a different setting, if you will, but at the same time there's a different feel to it, a different tone, all right? And let me move that because there's a footnote here. I don't want to cross out the footnote because there's a footnote right there. Whoops, what'd I do? Okay, right there's a footnote. So these days, I am still walking at a cathedral pace. So that's a word where they're going to define for you. That's going to be hard. Meditative. The person's meditating as they walk, if you will. Or they're walking at a slower pace, if you will. Okay? Now, I don't know if they mean these days as in maybe that turning point was a fast forward. Maybe it jumped over stuff. Maybe this is talking about the person's journey in life. And earlier it was generalisms, and now they're in past middle age or something. Perhaps. That might be pushing it, but we're not sure of the figurativeness that's going on here. So these days, I am still, but it says still, I am still walking at this meditative, slower, contemplative, reflective kind of pace, okay? Beneath the branches bending across avenues. So that is also, has that seasonal reference to it. So they're probably bending because if we don't know if the author's talking about the same setting or a couple of years later, but the author seems to also be using the tie-in to the season, in particular, floral growing on trees, right? So if the branches are bending, it's not spring, it's not summer, it's when the full growth is there, really, right? So that is kind of what the author's saying. So these days, I'm still walking a cathedral pace beneath the branches bending across avenues, which is just the streets. Whatever avenue, whatever street, right? Brownstones, like rows of lived-in chapels. So a lot of students I work with do not know what's going on there at that point. So first of all, it says a chapel is a private place of prayer or worship. So it's not particularly a church or a synagogue. It's normally a smaller place, an alcove, if you will. And even though this is being related to maybe something religious here, it's not particularly what the author's saying here. So there's that. And the other thing is a brownstone. So a brownstone is a kind of apartment. And this is slightly unfair because usually you're not supposed to use anything except for what the author tells you. All right. And so these are normally in Brooklyn. Okay. A lot of Brooklyn, which letter from Brooklyn makes sense. And some of these appear in Hell's Kitchen area and other parts of Manhattan as well. And normally they're about buildings about 3, 4, 5 stories high, and they're normally either one family or two family. They're not an apartment building per se, even though you can have apartments in them. And there's normally a stoop going up. And the stones it's made of, they're not the little red Kelly bricks, okay? They're a different kind of construction mechanism, and the stones are normally a brown color. All right, we've all seen these, and you could really after this, Google it. Just Google brownstone NYC or something, and it'll bring up some examples so you can get an idea of it. So working with students, I found this was slightly unfair for them to put into the passages, because it turns out a lot of students, even after I describe it, they're like, oh yeah, but there's enough students who say, I still don't know what you're talking about. And I have to actually bring it up on Google to show them what they're talking about. So, and normally they're not independent houses. They're normally right next to each other. So we have examples like that. So these days I'm still walking slowly and contemplatively beneath the bending branches, brownstones like rows of lived-in chapels. So the author is doing a comparison right there. That's a simile, okay? And then like a pop-up picture book I could have had as a child, but didn't. So it seems the author's being reflective here, especially on the child part. But and then if the brownstones are being compared to little chapels, it could be the author had always longed to live in one of them, or in a nice neighborhood, or something like that. Okay, and then the thing with the pop-up book, that's normally a little book with the little doors and stuff you can do on it, or when you open it, it kind of opens like some cards do that as well. They're classic, especially for like 2-year-olds, so the kid can, and you can talk about the different things physically and things like that. What's interesting is not only is the author making the comparison to this, but he says, but didn't. Okay, so the author did not have pop-up books, and therefore, and the way this is written, we're not sure, particularly if the author had a brownstone either. So it seems to me, trying to connect some of the dots, especially with going back here, it sounds like the author, and I don't know if this is one journey or many journeys, but let's assume it's many. The author seems to be walking perhaps across the Brooklyn Bridge, coming into Brooklyn, probably walking into the neighborhoods like Park Slope, which is near Prospect Park, or there's other ones in the Dumbo area. There's brownstones all up in that area. And it seems to be walking through these neighborhoods, and it's being very reflective about that. Now, maybe that's where they lived as a child. I don't really know. I'd like to think so, but I don't know the history of the author, and even if this is a true story. Okay, it sounds like the author is the narrator, because it's talking about I, and but it doesn't have to be. That's not the way it works. And because the author is walking at this cathedral pace, and giving these comparisons here, the author wants the author himself to do these comparisons. It seems to be very self-reflective. Okay, and then we can know that for certain, because the next thing the author says is how Brooklyn makes me nostalgic. Okay, which is yearning for the past. So either the author could be regretful about something, unhappy about something, or nostalgia doesn't need to be negative. It could be that they had such a good experience in the past that walking through this area gives them those good feels. Now, maybe they lived here once upon a time. Maybe as a child they lived here, especially with the reference to the pop-up book. That's a weird phrasing in this whole poem. So it's an interesting way for the author to express this. So we're seeing, even though the poem's not large, it's kind of getting deep really fast. Okay. So how Brooklyn makes me nostalgic for the moment I am walking inside of. Okay. So if we have to read that correctly. So the author seems to be saying they're nostalgic walking in Brooklyn. Okay. So that's good. That's a positive tone, a positive message. I can see myself doing that. I live in Queens now, but I had grown up until I was like 14 in Brooklyn. And, I'm a New Yorker through and through anyway, so I can get the sense of that. And it seems to be that the author might be later in their life. I don't know, just wild guessing. And they're just being very reflective on their journey through life and where they've been. And again, they're yearning for something, as it says, it's yearning for the past. Okay. The question is, how much yearning? Is it a good feely thing, or are they actually trying to seek something? And again, it says these days. So again, I don't know if this is one journey being described here of a walk through Brooklyn, if you will. And just to make a wild guess again, maybe they're walking through a neighborhood that they used to live in, or a neighborhood that just makes them feel comfortable anytime they come back to New York. Let's say they had left New York, they moved to San Francisco, and they're coming back, or they come back every 5 months to a conference or something like that, or whatever in Manhattan, right? So I don't know. The author doesn't tell us, and we can't even infer that kind of things from this. So all we can do is speculate. We don't want to wild speculate to the point where we're making up nonsense, especially when we get to the questions. Remember, an inference has to be based on things in the story. Now, we can synthesize an inference, but it has to be based on something the author told us. So some of the stuff I'm saying just makes practical sense, but we don't know if it's actually what's literally happening. All right, so we have to, and we also have to decide, because this is a poem, is the author literally doing these walks, or is the author just running through there in the mind? I can be reflective to things that I did back in Brooklyn when I was, say, 5 years old, but that doesn't mean I'm literally in the neighborhood doing that. So this walk through Brooklyn that the author seems to be taking, is it actually happening? Right, that's one of the things we need to figure out and decide here as well. It seems to me it is. I could see, I go walking, and I could understand and see that happening. So again, how Brooklyn makes me nostalgic for the moment I am walking inside of. Okay, these late afternoons filled with a loneliness that makes me feel distinctly myself, and an awareness of how rare that is. So that's a weird conclusion. It sounds sad. Okay, the phrasing of loneliness. So normally when you're lonely, it has this, the poor lonely guy kind of a thing, right? But we all want to have autonomy and be independent. Who doesn't want to have private time and stuff like that? I think that's more, the latter is more where the author's talking about the loneliness. And we can almost prove it because the author said, the loneliness makes me feel distinctly myself. So the author, whatever has happened that they were kind of whining or complaining or pointing out earlier, that they didn't have the brownstone of the pop-up book and all that kind of stuff like that, they still seem content with themselves. They're happy with who they are in the moment, in the now, in the present, right? That kind of a thing. And instead of crying over spilled milk, if you will, they're content, and they're willing to cherish those moments and enjoy them for what they are. And it seems to imply that the author is repeating this journey through the thing because it's good. And since the author, even though the author is lonely, it seems like maybe the author has reached an inner peace, okay, with something that may have happened, some regret, some bad thing, so inner peace, I don't know. Is that what's going on here? It's hard to say. And the author hits it home again to not only say feels distinctly myself, but an awareness of how rare that is. So it seems like the author actually appreciates the fact that they've come to terms with something, that they understand themselves, that they're content with their life, content with themselves, content where they are right now. Okay, that kind of a thing. All right. Now, if we come back to the title, Letter from Brooklyn, I don't know that we get too much out of that. Okay, Brooklyn. The author claims that walking through Brooklyn here, Letter from Brooklyn, because it doesn't say letter to myself from walking through Brooklyn or something. It just seems to be a diary entry almost. A poetic diary entry is what's going on here. Things that we can kind of pull out of this. So one of the things you guys should be doing as soon as you read a passage is you should be snapshotting what the main idea is at some point. So that's something you should always do no matter what the passage is, whether it's a poem, a science passage, a biographical piece, a documentary, a recipe even, and obviously fiction versus nonfiction of any genre or category. See if there's a theme. What is the topic? What is the message? What is the author's point of view? What is the setting? What are the characters? Okay, in this analysis, I just went through ripping this apart and asking yourself, especially when we came to the beginning, I had a lot of question marks. I think we partially answered some. So if we come back to those, and let me change the color to be red, to be clear, kind of that's what we're doing. I've had a problem with this switching the thing. I can already see how this will end. Okay, it seems to be this person's journey, if you will. That's maybe one interpretation of this. However, go try the bridges thing, absent-minded tourist. The weather will turn cold, but that will all happen later. So the author knows that life changes. That might be an interpretation here. So change. At the same time, if we come to the bottom, and if we do the here and now, the author seems content with that. So if we kind of tie this into greater things, and again, I don't know if the author consciously did this or not, but the circle of life, the journey of life, going from here to there, and just enjoying things for the moment of what they are, all right? There was another thing I pointed out, and then the weather will turn cold, but that will all happen later. So again, the author is saying, bro, let's just calm down and let's just enjoy things for what they are. And we also have this thing about the cathedral piece where the author seems to be in the moment of things, and they're fine with that. And we have the confirmation about the loneliness makes me feel distinct, and an awareness of how rare that is, that the author seems to be appreciating everything for what it is, right then and there, that kind of a thing. So there is a circularity here. The thing, too, with this being one stanza is that what the author's saying is kind of meandering, and it almost flows with this so-called walk that the author is taking. And again, we could say this was one walk, or we could say the author goes on a walk every day. We don't know. It's not really told to us, but I think on either viewpoint, either lens of this here, I think it's a good strategy and a good way to approach this. And I think it's more about so if we get to the main idea part of it, that we should be in the here and now, okay, and that we could be longing for some things, but I think the author's content in the now and being self-aware of it, okay, and that even though things can go away with change, it's also worth appreciating what you have now and what's going on with that, and that even though things might be inevitable, the present is always still the present. All right. So the author's definitely being nostalgic here. I think that's a overall tenet to the whole poem here, and that time changes stuff, people change stuff, and the author is using intimate moments here a few times. So we have the thing with the wind blowing on the person, intimacy, and the opposite being a felt distance. And then the author repeats that again. So there is repetition of those kind of things happening here repeatedly. And they're subtle. The author casually throws them in here. And again, tying back to what I was just starting, this is a meandering kind of conversation because the author seems to be meandering. And almost, if you will, it's following the walk with the person, So I kind of like the way the author did this, even though at the surface it seems a little bit chaotic. The author's not giving us a lot of detail. So this is vivid. At the same time, it's pretty not specific. So it's kind of vague at the same time. But the author's being clear. And the fact that they're using the greenery and the seasons to try to give us something to grip on, I guess, and ricochet off of. So it's pretty clever poem. And it's deep and not deep at the same time. And the language the author uses is modern language. I don't know. Let's see. This was written in 2013, so it's a pretty modern poem. It's not using colloquial language or anything like that. So, yeah. So that seems to be the spiel. Again, you would rip the passage apart, try to understand it. Don't leave the passage and go to the questions until you snapshotted the main idea. All right. So, all right, we're going to do the questions in 1 second. All right, we're going to answer the questions. All right, so let me pop that up. Let's see what we got going on here. If I can get the screen right. Give me 2 seconds to get this oriented. Okay, that looks good. Yeah. Okay. How does the structure of the poem affect the poem's meaning? All right, so I don't like these questions. They're kind of just out there, and they're kind of rando. So it becomes a pain in the neck. Now, there's enough cases where the structure of the poem actually would reflect the author's meaning. There's also some where I can see it happened accidentally. All right, so what I pointed out, I think at least once, is that the structure of the poem is just one blob of a verse, right? It's one stanza. There's one paragraph here, if you will, and it's kind of meandering. Although it has a meaning to it, because the author is meandering around Brooklyn. So I think we can make those connections. The question is it just coincident, happenstance, or did the author do this by design? I have to kind of think maybe a little bit of both. So so structure could be the physical structure, or things that the author's doing in it, including like does every other line rhyme? Is there a repetition at the end of every stanza or something like that? Okay, so we did see there was repetition here with the greenery and with the word intimacy. All right, so there is that going on. Otherwise, it's a meandering blob. The author is being succinct, although I think the author's clear on the main idea. So let's try to tie that up in a knot and see if we can get here. There's one piece of advice that's always given: cover up the answer and figure it out, and then see if you can find the answer. That doesn't always work with these things. There's also I've been in many conversations this year, and it gives me a sour feeling that people keep saying, "Oh, you don't really need to read the passage. Just figure out from the questions." You can't do that with this kind of thing. You just can't do it, and you really can't even do it with the other ones. This notion of skimming passages, it's a dangerous line to cross over. You have to read the passage. This is called reading comprehension, and it goes deep on this kind of exam. So this is not just rando stuff. You need to get roll up your sleeves and sweat a bit to struggle for some of these. And usually you can end up with two answers. Two you can rule out reasonably safely, and then you'll be stuck with two that seems to be the perfect answers. And you need to tie break them in some way. You need to tie break them with what the passage says. You need to tie break them with what the question's asking you. And you need to tie break them with the choices. Another way to say that is that many are focused on the reading comprehension of the passage, and the truth of the matter, and I say this through many of my videos, is the reading comprehension is of the passage. There's reading comprehension of the question, and there's reading comprehension of the choice, all three. And if you put all your energy into just the passage, And believe me, the passage is important. But if you don't put any energy into the question or the choices, you're flipping coins. You're throwing dots on a wall. So this needs to be an intelligent, strategic pursuance of the answers to these questions. All right. This is not your gut feeling. This is not whatever. These are precise questions asking you to whittle something down through intellect and through observation and through your inferencing skills and things like that. Okay. So how does the structure affect the meaning? All right. So that's what we're trying to strive here. So the lack of rhyming suggests the beauty of each passing day is unique. So I suppose the author would agree with that, but the meaning that the author is telling us, it doesn't really seem to jive with E. So E's just throw it out the window. E can't be the answer. That's not the theme. That's not the main idea. It's not even really related to the meaning that the author's trying to communicate to us. Sure, anything can kind of be spun into something like this, but we really have to twist it to get it to be E. So it's not E. F. And by the way, the lack of rhyming was a structure thing. All right, so it says how does the structure? So they gave a structural issue, and then they kind of gave us a fake out for the rationale of it. Okay. F. The lengths of the sentences represent the complexity of the thoughts being represented. This is also vague and generic, and it kind of applied to anything. At the same time, we have like a long line like 20, and we have a whole bunch of short lines like 5, 6, 9, 16, and of course the last line, 26, is short. So the length of the sentences represent the complexity. So length of sentences is definitely a structural thing. Physical structure. There's also interpretive structure. They're talking about the physical structure so far on this question, at least on the choices, represent the complexity of the thoughts. And this is where poems get funny, because kind of once you get the aha moment that this is kind of about the here and now, and this author being basically content with the so-called loneliness, they're comfortable with themselves at this point in their life. Once that kind of clicks, the meaning is no longer deep. So, hindsight is 20/20. So going into something might be really hard. But once you, oh yeah, that was obvious, right? So we have those kind of scenarios. So the word complexity is slippery, because this could be a hard poem, and you may not have figured out what I told you about the here and now. But having said it, all the dots line up here, and it kind of makes sense that that is certainly a viable explanation for what this poem is talking about. All right, so anyway, the length of the lines are erratic. Now, it doesn't say length of lines, it says length of sentences. So it does use enjambment, which means continuing the line across multiple lines. It does do that, but I don't think it's going astray. So I would safely cross that F, but if I need to, I'll bring it back in. But I don't really think we need to go there. All right. I think F is out the window. So that leaves us with G and H. The use of complete sentences, okay, that's true, and that would be a structural thing, implies the speaker's appreciation for the clear beginning and end of each season. So although the author is dragging in seasons as an anecdote and a metaphor and applying meaning to almost making the thing flow, but also separating into parts, I just don't see this, because there's an implication then that the seasonal thing is the meaning, or certainly related to the meaning. And I think it comes along for the ride, so to speak, for what the author's trying to communicate. But I don't think that's it. All right. So at this point, we did POE, process of elimination. We're not going to accept H. We have to prove H. Right? So when you rule out 3 answers, the answer is not the one left. You may have made a mistake in processing the other 3. All right? So it says the single long stanza. That's also a structural thing, because it was one big blob again, one giant paragraph there. Reflects the continuous flow. I spoke about meandering a few times, of the speaker's thoughts. Yeah, the author is giving us a bite-sized snapshot of the thoughts. At the same time, they're meandering through something. So I think there's a little duality there. So the structure of the passage is that it's a single long blob of meanderings, yes. The meaning is the author is communicating their thoughts to us. The thought being the nostalgiaism, the thought being content with themselves. All right, so I like that, and that's the answer. All right, so that one kind of wasn't too bad. All right, 19, and let me just see that that's fitting on the screen right. Let's move this up just slightly. Okay, there's no extra line on there, right? Okay, so 19 says, which line supports the idea that a change in the weather will lessen the speaker's appreciation for the city? All right, so there's a couple things going on here because it starts out by there's a negativity there that I will grow tired, absent-minded tourists, right? So there's a negativity in the beginning there that connects us. And again, the change of the season is being talked about. We start basically at fall, winter's there, and maybe towards the end, the author is not as interested because it's cold out and things like that or whatever. So which lines support the idea that a change of the weather will lessen the speaker's appreciation for the city? All right, so A, as though the air has been forced into intimacy by the brevity of the daylight. So this seems to be the end of fall. It's referring to the end of the fall time. It's at lines 11 through 12. And the author seems to be kind of enjoying that. So I don't think it's A. I'm going to put the X outside of it because I'm not sure where the question is going. B, but when it starts darkening for this closeness, I know, will be a felt distance. So because the author's talking about intimacy a few times and the felt distance, that seems to be contrary to the intimacy that the author seems to cherish and want and need and is exploring and appreciating, right? So yeah, all that. All right, so B seems like a good answer. Because when it gets dark, it's going to get colder. There's less sunlight. You can't enjoy walking through the neighborhoods, whatever the case may be. That seems to be talking about this kind of meandering that's going on. Might come to a stop. It might be a snowstorm, things like that, okay? I don't know. C, like somebody drawing your attention to their lack of intimacy. So that's 15 through 16. That's this part right here. All right, let me change the color for this. Let's make that purple. So we're gonna be here at this point, okay? So the change in the weather will lessen the speaker's appreciation. So one of the things about line 15 through 16 is that's not literally referring to the change of the weather. Now, the lack of intimacy is something that the author does seem to be concerned about, but C doesn't bring the weather into it. Now, you could argue that the sentence it starts from, because it's starting from this but part right here, that's talking about the change in the daylight. So that is certainly true, but if we compare B to C, C seems strongest, but let's keep it in. And then D, these days I am still walking beneath the branches bending across avenues. So at this point, it seems that the season hasn't changed and that the author is still content. So, and it talks about lessening. Whoops, hold on. My screen just shifted over. I hope that didn't mess up what you guys think. It's talking about lessening, all right? And D is kind of towing status quo. So the answer wouldn't be D. All right, so then if we go back, what is the change in the weather that will lessen the speaker's appreciation? Okay, the darkening at 4 is definitely it, and will be lost. Something will be lost there, so it's going to be B. 19 is going to be B. All right, so that guy is, we kind of had a kick and scream a little bit for 19, but it does work. Okay, 20. Let me see if I can get this on the screen right. I may have to shrink this, so let's see. What do we have? We're missing 2 lines there. Let's see, does that work? Yeah, that works, and hopefully it's not too tiny for you guys. Okay, so read line 5 and 6 from the poem. So we're going to be up here now. Read line 5 and 6 from the poem. And they give the boldface quote. Often we will still want to refer back to the actual lines there. But that all, so the weather will turn cold, but that all will happen later. So that's weird phrasing in and of itself, no matter what it means. So how does this develop a theme of the poem? All right, so this gets to be pain in the neckish as well, because that's kind of pretty vague there. The cold weather, the weather will turn cold. So let's kind of not look at the answers first. The weather will turn cold, but that all happens later. So again, the author's saying, okay, the winter might come, but how about we just worry about where we are now? We're walking through Brooklyn. It's the middle of fall or whatever, and let's just appreciate it for what it is. So as bite-sizable as we can, because that's vague, the boldface stuff there. So we don't want to worry about that. Okay, so that is there. So how does this develop a theme of the poem? All right, so the lines highlight a contrast between the different seasons. So the seasons are not really the theme of the poem. The author is definitely using them as a vehicle to bring us through something, but the seasons in and of themselves don't particularly develop that theme. All right. The theme being that even though things may change like the seasons, value the present, be in the here and now, that kind of a thing. As I said before, it is what it is. Things are what they are right now. Don't worry about the thing. So the author is saying, okay, something may happen, the winter may occur, the next season might happen, but let's just chill for now. So I don't think there's a contrast being happening here. In fact, it's contrary to that. So it wouldn't be E. F says they show the sequence of the changes that are expected to occur. Yeah, there's teethers on there that there's an expectation that even though we might enjoy and live in the moment for now, it's not. It might eventually change. But I think the author, because they're so self-assured, especially at the end of what this meandering that they're doing, I think it wouldn't be F. They're not looking for the future. They're looking. The author keeps talking about now. I think. Okay. G. They warn about a problem that may require thoughtful preparation. So there is problems like the tourist and the bridge is inclined and stuff like that, which may imply the person's getting older. And but as we go through the poem, the author doesn't end off destitute, whatever. In fact, contrary, again, the author seems to be content. All right, so G doesn't make sense either there. And then we're left with process of elimination again. So we have to prove each. They emphasize, again, the 2 lines emphasize the importance of valuing the present. Well, that's what I keep talking about. All right. And even if we kind of back up to that, how would grow tired of the bridge, yada yada, weather would go cold, and then for now, let's worry about now. Not even worry about it. Let's be in the moment. All right. So they emphasize that. Okay. So just be in the here and now and live your life in the here and now. Right. Enjoy it for what it is. All right. So let me make sure this fits. 21. Is that fitting? Is there another line there? A, B, C, D. Let me try to just drag that a little bit. The actual question itself, we don't need to worry about too much. Okay, there we go. All right, so in line 7 through 9, which is part of what I was just reading, so we can kind of segue from what we just talked about into this. For now, it is the early edge of fall. leaves green still while in the air narrows is slightly crisp. If you notice, they're ending that quote not at the end of a sentence. So it's midway through a sentence. Sometimes that works to our advantage and sometimes not. We do want to make sure we're getting the full picture. And this whole notion of enjambment, which is the way poems are laid out, not in full paragraphs, we kind of have to read them per line. You should also read in full sentences. I like to compare the two interpretations kind of my brain can get out of that. So take things with the pauses that the author seems to be implying to us, but also try to combine them together so we can get sub pieces to the clues and full clues sometimes simultaneously, and we can do snap decisions of where the author seems to be going with some of these things as well. All right, so the word choice conveys the speaker's belief. All right, so this is relating to the author's point of view. In fact, a few of these were, and a few we tied into the main idea already. So I didn't point that out earlier, but that should be clear that we're trying to use literary devices to string us along. Setting, characters, tone, turning points, main idea, theme, structure. We try to use those as our context clues for our reading comprehension, because that's what this section is. So, so for the beauty of the current season should still be appreciated. So, for now, so the author starts out by 5.56. It's gonna get cold, but that's later. For now, so the author does seem to be saying, let's appreciate what we have. I'm tempted to circle out already, but let's just check it and make sure there's not a better answer, or make sure we didn't misunderstand what the question is asking us. So that's a big thing. A lot of students don't really recognize what they're being asked. And again, I talked about the reading comprehension of the passage, the reading comprehension of the question, the reading comprehension of the choices. That's just as complicated as the passage often. In fact, even worse. So, so the word choice in the bold conveys the speaker's belief that the change in the weather signifies the end of the most pleasant season. No, the author doesn't quite go there at all. And the meanderings that the author goes through, the author seems to be content with whatever is going on. Again, the author wants to live in the present, in the here and now. And the author seems to be fine with that. And especially if we go to the very end again, that the authors distinctly themselves an awareness of rare that is that they appreciate the here and now, not just their loneliness per se, right? And the loneliness there again was not negative. It was a positive loneliness where they're independent. They're being themselves. Nobody's telling them what to do. They have private time. It's not a loneliness like they're stuck in their house and they never leave and they're sad kind of a thing. That's not I think where the author's going here. So that seems to very strongly rule out B. The word choice conveys the author's belief that the transition from one season to another happens swiftly and without warning. So that's an interesting one, because the author is being succinct as they're evolving along the poem. And I wonder if that could be a thing. So I'll just tilde that. I want to come back to it. And then the word choice conveys the author's belief that the change in the weather, and that's the same as the transitions of the weather, is subtle, is so subtle that people rarely observe or feel it. Well, I don't think the passage is about the seasons. I think it's about living in the here and now and enjoying things and reminiscing to the past. So D just seems to be contrary to anything that's going on here. And let's see if we can do that same thing, because I really liked A. So let's try to get rid of C and see that same kind of thing is happening. The transition from one season to another happens swiftly and without warning. Yeah, so the author might believe that, but I see nothing here that I can get inference and clues to synthesize that conclusion with. Again, the author might believe that, but I can't prove it. All right, so for that reason, I would get rid of C. And then the beauty of the current season should still be appreciated. That's, I think, a major tenet to what the author's talking about here. just live in the moment, enjoy it for what it is. Those kind of things. So A seems to strongly be the answer. Okay, and we ruled out the others. We proved the others were not the right answer. Okay, 22. The details on 9 through 12 convey a central idea. So we express the central idea a few times. So theoretically, this should be easy. So let's look at 9 through 12. Let's see, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we have the end of that same thing. So they gave us 5 and 6, then they gave us up to that comma, and then they're giving us after there. So again, I don't like doing that. It's almost like they gave us another section with the boldface without putting the boldface, and they're forcing us to go back to those lines. So we can't lose the context of what we just talked about. All right. So I'll just read from line 7. For now, it is the early stage of fall. Leaves green still, while the air narrows, is slightly crisp, almost grazing the hair of my arm like a passing stranger, as though the air had been forced into intimacy by the brevity of daylight. So let's see what's going on here. That conveys the central idea of the passage. Hold on, I keep dragging my tab all over the place. Let me just go back to the, is that still in the right place? Yeah, we're good there. Okay. Okay, so shows that the cool weather makes the speaker reflect more deeply on life. Okay, again, the main idea is about the here and now, not particularly about the weather. So I don't like E. I'm not going to cross it out literally, but I don't think it's a good answer. Suggesting to convey, so those lines convey a central idea. If you notice, I repeat the question every time I look at a choice. So I'm re-emphasizing to my brain, what are they actually asking out of me for this kind of a thing? So it conveys the central idea of the poem by suggesting that the speaker feels uncomfortable with what the coming weather signifies. So I dislike F even more than E. It's not about the weather. It's about living in the now and the here and now and the nostalgic feel and things like that on top of it. There's kind of two things going on simultaneously. And at least from what I could see, neither E or F captures that. G implies that the sensations the speaker experiences during the seasons are fleeting. In fact, I think the author uses fleeting here somewhere, don't they? I don't know. I may have read this poem so many times that I thought the word fleeting was actually in the poem. I don't see it right now. Yeah, it's not there. Okay. So those lines 9 through 12 implies that the sensations the speaker is experiencing right now are fleeting. That's what it's saying. They could eventually end up being a distant kind of thing if we continue on, and force into the brevity of daylight as though they had been forced. So that seems interesting. 22G seems interesting. And then H, the lines convey a central idea that suggests that the thought of fall approaching increases the loneliness that the speaker feels. So I think there's, again, two issues with H. One is that the main idea is not about the seasons. The seasons are being used as a metaphor. They're not the main idea. All right? The other is that the author, even though the author feels lonely, we're told at the end, filled with a loneliness that makes me feel distinctly myself. It's not the seasons. I think the author's happy with that. So it wouldn't be H either. There is a tie in there. There is an argument for H, but because it says increases the loneliness the speaker feels. So, and it ends up at the end saying the late afternoons filled with a loneliness. But that's the point. That happens at the end. It doesn't happen here. All right. So it's asking, up earlier what is being conveyed. So H is not being conveyed at that point. And I don't even think the argument for H kind of is not perfect. So, all right, so we're left with G. G's our answer. Implies that the sensations are fleeting, right? So they're going away as the person's meandering, if you will. I don't particularly like this question. I don't find it quite strong, but it's there, and we can safely rule out E, F, and H. I wish G was worded a little stronger, at least for me personally, but so be it. Okay, 23. And if we notice, by the way, at this point, we have, I don't know, 6 or 7 questions, and there's actually 2, 3 or 4 more. So there's a lot of questions on this poem, which emphasizes, it's one thing to not understand a poem that only maybe has 4 or 5 questions, but if you don't understand a poem and has 10 or 11 questions, you lose a lot of points, and that's true of any passage. Poetry is complicated. It's probably the hottest literacy genre that students complain about the most. So, and then again, that's why I'm doing these video sessions on the poetry. But yeah, it's something you guys need to hone and make sure you're getting it right. And remember, too, some years they add more than 1 poem. So you don't want to not do the poetry just because, there's all the other passages. Well, what if there's 2 or 3 poems? You don't want to undermine yourself. The SHSAT in specific has what I call the wild card. And every year, 1 or 2 or 3 things in the math and even in the literature side get to be that way. For instance, like the first question we did here, the structure of the poem's meaning. This is a pretty unique question because this poem was pretty unique. And a lot of students don't really study this or understand what they're even being asked. So that's why you need the exposure to this kind of a thing. All right, so I don't know if they asked a question like 18 on the real exam. It would make sense that they did, or why included in the handbook. Remember, the handbook is not definitive. It's basically a collection of representational examples. So it is neither literally the exam or not the exam. It's just giving you a lot of information about the format, general setup, what you may or may not be asked. And it's just the major tenet is to show that the diversity of what you could be asked about this is pretty large. All right, so it means there's a lot of topics you need to crack down on and get and hone your skills on, which is no small task to do. All right, so that's fitting on the screen. So we're up to 23. 23, which idea does the comparison of the brownstones to a pop-up book convey? All right, so this is asking for a compare and contrast in terms of literary devices. These can be either super hard or not super hard. I'll be honest with you, this question is a problem for a lot of students because, number one, they didn't know what a brownstone was, so they didn't even know what the comparison was asking them to do. And for those who knew it, this is probably the most obtuse line of the poem, and it's actually hard for me to interpret it and figure out literally exactly what the author's trying to say here, and even figuratively. So there's not quite, to me, the sentence structure was kind of not perfect. So this is pretty darn slippery, this question. So this, to me, might be the hardest question of the group so far. So we need to understand what the comparison was, first of all, right? So they're asking, let's see, where is that? So we're here to here, right? That group right there is what we're being asked to understand and interpret and figure out. So which idea does that comparison convey? Okay, so it reveals that some people are still influenced by powerful images of childhood. Now, the author is definitely being nostalgic, which is relating to the past. The author definitely brings childhood into the story by saying a book I could have had as a child, and furthermore didn't. Right? It'd be one thing if the author is actually doing the comparison and actually had those books, but for some reason the author didn't. Was there a family issue? Whether it was the money issue? I don't really know how to make that connection, because I'm almost kind of grasping at straws of how a child, and when they say didn't, I don't know if they mean they never went to a library even, or what. So it's again, the author gives us enough specifics and wanders us through this meandering and subtleties, giving us enough clues. At the same time, it's very vague and non-specific. So this kind of gets hard. So it reveals that some people are still influenced by powerful images from childhood. Yeah, well, they said it, right? So A has to be an issue. I don't know how strong it really is, but it's there. That's certainly on the table. It indicates that the neighborhood the speaker is walking through is charming and appealing. All right, so that sounds weird. A lot of students rule this out. Okay, so let's rule it out for now. Okay, it suggests that the speaker has wanted to live in the neighborhood since childhood. So that gets interesting. That definitely gets interesting. And it seems to piggyback off of B. So if B is out, then maybe C is out. And if B is in, maybe C is in. All right, so we're gonna come back to these. And it suggests that people often experience lingering regret from their past. So there is a negativity to this poem that I can't quite figure out. It starts out by saying the author is talking about the British incline and Taurus being annoying, and even the part with the intimacy later, if we get around to this part here, where it's saying the wind is blowing on the person. I almost got the indication that they were annoyed with that, but you could also, I think the Valen interprets they're not annoyed with that. So there's kind of a bunch of yin-yanging going on around in the poem, which is probably the beauty of this poem. It should be open for interpretation to certain extents. That's the beauty of all literature. Okay. Now the question is, the fact that they're mentioning the brownstones in the pop-up book that they didn't have, certainly they didn't have the pop-up book, is that a negative? Are they being regretful? Are they sorrowful? Right? All these things. Well, the problem is after that. Right after that, the last few lines from 24 down, the author seems content with their scenario. And that's weird because could it be that the author keeps walking through Brooklyn because they're kind of seeking something? There's a hole in their life. They're trying to obtain something. So this gets to be a hard question, as I said already, and it's going all over the place. So, but the notion of regret there says, what does the whatever convey? So, are they being regretful? It could be regret. The problem is it regret, right? So the and it says often. So there's a little loophole there in what the test writer did there. It doesn't say always experiences. It says often. So often's a lot of time, and I'm not convinced that that's what the author's saying is happening. All right. So 23 does not seem to be D. All right, so we kind of ruled out B and C, and we tilted A. And we need to come back and tie break these. Again, I personally think this is a hard question. So how does the comparison to the pop-up books I could have had as a child but didn't? And they're emphasizing that specifically. Okay, even though they mentioned the brownstones, they're specifically pointing that out. Now, if we go back to the quote involving the brownstones, these days I'm still walking at a cathedral pace beneath the branches heading across avenues. Brownstones like rows of lived-in chapels. If that's kind of safe zones for where those families live, and that's a content neighborhood, I get a good vibe out of that. And it seems to be that the author seems to find comfort in that, especially relating to the lived in chapel part. Okay, they don't actually mean they're at a tiny church or something like that. It's just these little nuggets of residence. The author seems to be leaning on. So let's go back to A, B, and C then. It reveals that some people are still influenced by powerful images from their childhood. Is that the compare and contrast? What is the comparison? Two things are being compared. Is it the brown son versus the book, or is it childhood versus the brown son, childhood versus the book, or something else, right? So it's getting kind of slippery the more we explore A. It's too broad, and it's hard to say. At the same time, maybe the message here is broad. So let's look at B and C. Let's leave A alone still. It indicates that the neighborhood the speaker is walking through is charming and appealing. So one of the problems with B is that it almost seems too obvious that it doesn't seem to play with everything we're talking about. It's almost like an off answer. And this happens in the math section sometimes too, where we get so bogged down with looking for nuances and special wording that the math question may have. Same for the ELA section. That we kind of get lost in the full picture. And sometimes a math question is just as simple as it is, right? Sometimes there's no problem or trick lurking within it. I think B has that flavor to it, where it's just straight up. The guy, again, if he's walking through the neighborhood in the here and now, couldn't he just be appreciating the neighborhood? It's an attractive neighborhood. He's meandering through it. He's going at a cathedral pace. He's being meditative as he walks through it, right? So that is a reasonable answer. So B is good. And then it suggests that the speakers wanted to live in the neighborhood since childhood. So that there we have a problem. But again, if it's the here and now, and the author's not worrying about the past and not worrying about the future, then the childhood, even though the author may have complaints, does not really seem to come into play. All right, so this one is a tough deal. The answer is B, for the reasons I just said. So we talked about ruling out two answers and doing a tiebreaker on the other. This was at the level where the tiebreaker is what I call a hair splitter. The difference between the two answers is this close, and there's no gap between my finger there. So it's a tough deal. And this is one of the ones where you wonder, like, is it worth the investment of time to really whittle us down and get out there? And especially on the SHSAT, this could be a field question. So how much effort did you want to spend on this when it may not even count on the actual score? So this is one of those things where you have to make a compromise, a pragmatic decision of how much time to spend on a certain question based on its level of complexity versus your understanding of what happened. And the problem with 23 is even worse than that, because a lot of students read this poem and they're kind of clueless of what the theme and the main idea is. So when we get into stuff about what something specifically conveys, and again, I think that the lines 20 to 21 are probably the two hottest lines in the passage. There's no picnic here, people. All right, so there we go. All right. Unfortunately, we still have 3 more questions left, so let's get to them. Okay, this one's longer. Let me make sure that fits. Let's see. What does the question say? It says, read these lines from the poem. So I'm just going to scroll that up. And yeah, we can get that on the screen that way. Okay. So this is the beginning of the poem. It's the first thing up until actually no, sorry, it's the first line. So I'm going to put a plus here, the first line, and then 20 what did it say? 21 through 22. So it's going to be these lines are, but a plus with a circle around it. All right. We kind of analyzed this to death, so whatever, we don't particularly need to beat it too much. I can see already how this will end. And that was one of our original. Can see how what will end, okay? How Brooklyn makes me nostalgic for the moment I am walking inside, okay? So that kind of gives a good feel. How do these lines develop the central idea? So again, the central idea relates to living in the here and now, and also the nostalgicness of the person's life and being content with that, okay? So theoretically, that's easy, but the choices might make this pretty darn hard to do. All right, so do these lines develop the central idea by suggesting the speaker's desire to find a way to break free from the repetitive pattern of daily life? Now, there does seem to be repetition happening here, where the person's talking about growing tired of doing something, and they also talk about these days I'm still walking, right? So we do notice the person is probably doing some sort of repetitive behavior. Is that in and of itself the central idea and the development of the main idea, right? So suggests the speaker desire to find a way to break repetitive patterns of daily life. Again, I think the passage ends in a good tone and a positive tone. So it seems like E is not it, even though the person is kind of mentioning some complaints. So E doesn't seem to be the answer. F reveals. So how does these lines develop a central idea of the poem? Revealing the speaker's feeling of disappointment over the predictable change in the season. So I think there's two things. First of all, I'm not convinced the author's disappointed. And second of all, it's not about the seasons. So it can't be F. Again, the seasons are being used as a vehicle here, but they in and of themselves, as far as I'm concerned, don't seem to be the main idea. All right. G, so these lines develop the central idea by emphasizing the speaker's awareness of the future, right? Because the person keeps talking about the future, but says, we'll get to that when we get to it, signifying the present moment in the setting. Yes, the author keeps coming back to that, so I like this, okay? And then do these lines develop the central idea of the poem? So first of all, that's the central idea. We're going to come back to G by showing the speaker's anticipation of specific emotions caused by the intimate knowledge of the setting. So, whoa, that's barely understandable. And it doesn't mean it's not the answer because of that, but it's kind of an esoteric explanation. So, shows the speaker's anticipation of specific emotions caused by the intimate knowledge of the setting. So the author knows the seasons, the author kind of knows about the living in and now, but they're comfortable with themselves. So I don't know what the anticipation is. The author knows what's coming, so there is an expectation, but I don't think the author keeps saying, let's just worry about it for today. So again, I don't just see that the answer could be H. And it's talking about nostalgia, right? And the moment, for the moment, I am walking inside of Brooklyn. So again, that's moving. They're talking about those lines in specific. So we're moving away from H there. And again, if we look at G, the speaker's awareness of the future signifies the present moment in the there, right? So there's a compare and a contrast going on there. And that ties into the theme and the main idea and all these kind of things, even a summary if we get a little more vague about it, all right? All right, we still have two more questions. The speaker's thoughts throughout the poem develop a theme by showing that. So they're not particularly asking for the theme, but let's kind of see. So, and they're talking about the development again. So there's a lot of questions dealing with how something evolves and comes into being. All right, 25, the thoughts develop a theme by showing that although people may hold expectations for the future, some people long for present experiences while they're still happening. So I like that. That seems to be exactly what I keep talking about. So that seems to be the answer already. The speaker's thoughts throughout the poem. So again, this is an overall one. We had a lot of questions about specific lines. This is how does the whole thing create that formulation of what's going on. So the speaker's thought throughout. So and again, this is an author's point of view. In this case, the speaker's point of view. Throughout the poem, develop the theme that's going on here. So people come from different places. Most people feel drawn to the special charm the city holds. So yeah, the author is definitely appreciating the city, but I don't know that the author brings it to other people. The poem to me seems very personal. So and that again, most people here, I don't know where this is coming from. It says the speaker's thoughts. I don't know how to inference that even from esoteric clues, and I don't think the esoteric clues are there. And so for that reason, B just seems out the window. C, the speaker's thoughts develop the theme by showing that although people, again, not people, make decisions about their life, there will still be some things beyond their control. So this is about the author. I don't think this gets projected onto other people. So it's not that, and it might be true, but the author just doesn't go there, and I don't know how to inference even that. And then D, the speaker's thoughts throughout the poem develop a theme by showing that though general expectations exist, people have no way of knowing what a given day will actually bring. So again, it's not about people, and even though it's true that I think nobody knows what's going to happen in 5 seconds, that's not where the author's going. I think the author is content with the here and now. They're content with themselves, and that's the thoughts that the author has. All right, they're content with their loneliness or whatever. So if we come back to A, the speaker's thoughts. Although people may hold expectations for the future, some people long for the present experience while they are still happening. Now, what I don't like about A is just talking about people again. I don't think the question is about people. I think it's about the author. So, I don't know. I think the test writers got this maybe a little wrong. The author is never dragging us in as the reader. The author is not trying to ask anything out of us. The author is telling us what they feel. Now, but if we tie this into a theme, the theme is not, the author is dealing with the present. Now, the theme would just be more generic about the here and now or the nostalgia part. So thematically, it's not about the author anymore. It's about just everybody in general. So that's probably where the people part came from. So some of my rationales here, I kept emphasizing the people part, but on each one I mentioned the people, I'll mention something else. So it weakens my rationales, but I would still rule out B, C, and D, and I would still bring A in, okay? And almost at that point, it sounds like my rationale about people is the opposite of what I should be saying. So, yeah. All right, so maybe what I was saying was weak. So anyway, 25 kind of rubs me the wrong way, but it's a question, and that's that. And then finally, we're going to come to the last question. And let me just make sure the screen is all right. Yeah, it is. So the poet develops the speaker's point of view by. So I kind of always get confused on this kind of question because it seems to me that the poet is the speaker. Now, maybe we don't know that for certain. It seems to me that the poet here is Jacob whoever. Let me bring that up. Hold on. Wait, where are we? Yeah, it seems to me that speaker is talking about their own experience. But who knows? This could be a totally made-up story. It sounds biographical to some extent, but I can't prove that. So anyway, this is an author's point of view. It's certainly somebody's point of view. So the poet develops the speaker's point of view by doing what? All right, so at this point, we ripped the passage apart by reading it. We ripped it by answering all the questions. So theoretically, this should just pop into there. So, but again, this gets back into the complexity of these questions where we'll have to read do the analysis of the question and the choices. So they could give you mind-blowing choices here. Let's see how bad or not bad it is. So the poet develops the speaker's point of view by providing details about the speaker's longing to be in a different place. All right, so nostalgia is mentioned, but we're told that's a yearning for the past. So there is a longing going on here. At the same time, the author's content. The narrator is at the end says they're fine with their loneliness, whatever that loneliness is supposed to mean. So I'm not sure because it says develops. So develop means the creation of the idea, the exploration of the idea, the conclusion of the idea. Although there's that yearning, the longing for the past brought into it, I'm not sure. So I would question mark or tilde E. Right? 26 shows that the speaker's sense of unease about the passing seasons. So again, I don't think the author's worried about the seasons. The author is using the seasons as a metaphor and a vehicle to bring forth what the author wants to tell us. The seasons in and of themselves doesn't seem to be a problem. And in fact, when the author mentions them, the author seems to be content with them. The author seems to be happy. And even though the author seems to express some negativity against maybe when it's getting cold and so on, the author doesn't totally flip out or go total diss it, right? There's no diss track for that. So I don't know. F doesn't seem like it would be it. The poet develops the speaker's point of view by including details about the speaker's hope that life will remain unchanged. No, I suppose that could be one thought that might seem like it could be the situation, but this is not about the author's recognizing change. The author's not really complaining about change, but the author is saying, how about we always just focus on the here and now? And we can also think back to the past through nostalgic purposes. But I don't think it's G at all. The author has no hope about things staying the same. The author's recognizing that they change. All right? H, the author develops the speaker's point of view by showing that speaker's desire to treasure and appreciate the changes. That's almost exactly what I did for my explanation of a G. So the answer seems to be H, but let's rule out E for sure. Providing details about the speaker's longing to be in a different place. No, the author is content with the here and now, so it's not E. And then again, H shows the speaker's desire to treasure and appreciate the changes taking place. So the author's meandering through life, if you will, by using, again, I don't know if it's a metaphor or maybe if the author actually walked through Brooklyn, they came to the realization that it's a metaphor for the journey through life or whatever the case may be happening here. And yeah, so that is that question. So as you can see, these passages can get beastly. The poem itself was brief, and the author was very clever in how they used the different things here. So, all right, so that's that question, and we're gonna do the Form B1, which is called cross purposes, after this. Peace.